Okay. Okay, so wait lang. Okay, so I think most of us is already familiar with the definition of the economics, diba? So it's the science of the allocation of the scarce resources to satisfy our needs and wants. Okay, so in other terms, so economics is the study of scarcity. Okay, so economics, okay, so is the efficient allocation of the scarce means of production toward the satisfaction of human needs and wants. So naatay duha ka opposing force. Okay, so as humans or individuals or organizations, we have unlimited wants and needs, di ba? However, those unlimited wants and needs cannot be satisfied because we have limited resources. Okay? So we have limited resources. That is our problem. However, kung atong i-rank ang atong wants and needs, we know that there are wants and needs nga will satisfy us more, 'di ba? So we need to know we need to um reflect on ourselves. What are the goals or what are our wants and needs that we want to be prioritized, okay, or we want to achieve first. Okay, so actually economics is also the foundation of finance, di ba? So that is why we also need to allocate um, financial resources towards achieving the goals of the management, okay, or even the goals of the individuals. So that's the situation sa scarcity. The economics aims to allocate, okay, aims to allocate those limited resources to those unlimited wants and needs. Okay, so so this is the problem: scarcity. Economics tries to solve this problem. Okay, so how do we allocate those limited resources to satisfy those unlimited wants, okay, or limited wants and needs? Okay, so now factors of production. So as we know, we have the four types. Okay, so every time we produce goods or we provide services, so we need the following. So the labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay, so say labor, of course, this refers to the workers or the service or um, not only the workers but even katong mga managers. Okay, so land. So it does not only refer to the land itself, okay, so ang yuta, but also the fruits of the land, okay, so such as fruits, vegetables, raw materials, and so on. So capital, so this refers to the money and machine that we use to produce the goods, okay, and then the entrepreneurship, so this refers to the ability of the owners to manage the business. So I will spend more time on this model. Okay, so this is sa microeconomic lang ni siya. Okay, microeconomics lang ni nga flow model. So this is where our or the economic flow of transactions. Okay, Okay, so now we look first at the households. So there is at na magtanaw. So so let's analyze first the inner nga circular flow. So from households to factor market to businesses to product market. Okay, so the households, the as individuals, okay, so we sell different factors of production. So for example, we sell as employees, we sell our labor or service to the entity. Others are renting their lands, okay, or selling their goods. And then capital, so machines. And then some of us are not workers or employees. Others are owning their own businesses. So they are lending their entrepreneurial ability to the entity, okay, to the factor market. So ang factor market diri ang tanan nga gi-sell ni household. So katong labor, land, capital and entrepreneurial ability. Now this factor market diri magkuha ang businesses. Okay? So the factors of production are sold to the businesses. So they use the factors of production, of course, to produce goods and provide services. So in turn, those goods and services nga na-produce sa business, padulong na siya sa product market. Okay? So ang product market, of course, this is where the households will buy their wants and needs. Okay? So that's the inner circular flow. So from households, factor market. So diri mura kumbaga warehouse sa tanan gi baligya sa households. Then the businesses will buy from them. Then the business will store the goods and services or the in the product market. So dira naka-store. So now let's go to the circular flow kaning now the outer flow model. So kung gaay na it's counterclockwise, karon it's counterclockwise. So so this is the outer circular flow refers to the movement of money. Okay, so for example, we start with businesses. So they of course for them to buy the factors of production, they have to pay money. Okay? So the money that they use to pay those factors of production are what they call costs. Okay? So and then okay, so of course in the factor market, the firms buy those goods. Then those costs. So in the point of view of businesses, those are costs. But on the point of view of the households, okay, so this refers to the income or money income. So kung naghatag siya og labor, so that will be compensated through wages or salaries. So kung nagkuan siya land niya, nagpa-rent siya sa iyang land, so it will be in the form of rental payments. Or kung nag-provide siya capital sa business, so those households will be compensated with interest payments. And of course, lastly, if they are the owners of those businesses, their entrepreneurial ability will be compensated by the profits. Okay, so kaning income nga nakuha sa households, this will be used by the households to buy uh, the goods in the product market, the goods and services in the product market. Okay, so of course, when the money is used to buy those goods, ang kwarta nga igihatag sa households will go back to the businesses. So the cycle goes on. So magpalit na pug factors of production. So bayaran tong mga households and the households will buy goods. So and the money will go back to the businesses. Okay, so that's how the circular flow model works. So let's talk about opportunity cost. Okay, so as we know, opportunity cost is one of the costs relevant in our decision making. So however, in financial accounting, it is not used, 'di ba? So wala siya gigamit, but in management accounting, in economics, opportunity cost is a very important consideration. So opportunity cost is the foregone value of the next best alternative. So every time you make decision, okay, every time we make a decision, so we are foregoing something, 'di ba? So for example, if you are reviewing now, so you are foregoing your value nga maka-rest, okay, maka-relax. Okay? But if you are you choose to not take the review today, so of course you are foregoing the value, the benefit nga ma-learn, okay? Maka-learn pa mo or ma-refresh mo sa inyong naibawaan, okay? But you are choosing the rest or the relaxation, okay? So in talking about the opportunity cost, okay? So actually ang opposite niya is the sunk cost, okay? So ang sunk cost, of course, that is irrelevant in our decision making, okay? So historical cost is irrelevant, okay? Opportunity cost is relevant. However, sayon siya memorizon, sayon siya i-learn. However, it's very difficult to practice, okay? So it's very difficult to practice. That's why we have what we call the sunk cost fallacy, okay? So what is the sunk cost fallacy? We always consider the sunk cost in our decision making. Okay? So for example, every time nga muadto ka og eat all you can, okay? You have already paid for the cost, okay? But unsay naa sa atong hunahuna, okay? Every time nga mo palit ka or makasulod ka sa eat all you can. So we always say nga kailangan bawion ako ang kwarta nga akong gibayad. Okay? So kung unsa ka mahal ang imong eat all you can, inana pud kadagan imong kaon, di ba? Tama ba? Okay? That is an example nga atong giapil ang sunk cost in our decision making. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is that regardless kung nikaon ka og daghan or wala, okay? Or daghan imong gikaon or gamay ra, you have already paid for the cost. Okay? And it should not matter anymore as to what would be your next steps, okay? Or what would be your decision later on. Another, every time you go to the cinema, movie cinema, okay? Every time you go to the cinema tapos tanaw nimo nga na ay movie nga oy mahal, okay? Tapos nindot ang trailer so you are attracted to watch the movie. So mahal kaayo 3D pa gyud, okay? So then pag tanaw nimo sa movie arang day kalaay, arang kabati kaayo, okay? Unsa may kasagaran ginabuhat sa tao o ginabuhat nato, okay? So sayang, 'di ba? Sayang atong gibayad nga ticket, okay? But that again is a case of sunk cost fallacy which we are not aware but mo na atong ginabuhat perme, 'di ba? So sayang atong gibayad mo nang muunong na lang ka maski unsa ka kalaay dira, unsa ka ka-board, humano na lang gyud nimo ang movie tungod kay sayang imong gibayad. But what we fail to consider is the opportunity cost. Okay? Wa na to gi-consider ang opportunity cost in deciding. So unsa may opportunity cost? So unsa may cost kung magpadayon ka og tan-aw sa movie, 'di ba? So you will be bored, you will sleep, you will waste time. Whereas kung nihawa ra ka diretso, perhaps nalingaw pa ka, okay? You could have spent your time in more entertaining nga mga kuan. Like for example, naabay concert dira sa ubos, okay? Or you could have uh, gone somewhere else para malingaw. In the case of Eat All You Can, so dili necessary nga kailangan mukaon kag daghan. Okay? So you just eat what is kuan, kung unsay sakto sa imong lawas, okay? Because whether you like it or not, the cost is already paid. Okay? Wala na kay mabuhat ana. Okay? Basin unya mas magsakit pa imong tiyan kay daghan kag gikaon. So that's the cost. Okay? So opportunity cost is very important, but it's very difficult to practice. And all of us are victims of those kuan. So ang opportunity cost man gud kay dili visible, dili siya wa pa nimo na experience. But the sunk cost is already an experience. So that is why we consider the sunk cost. But in economics, we do not consider the sunk cost. What's important for us is the opportunity cost. So basic decision problem. So if you are one of the consumers, so the consumption problem is shared by the members of society. So what we eat, what we consume, these are all problems of the members of the society. The production problem is the problem of for the producers. Okay. As to the distribution of resources, it is the problem of the government on how to distribute those the national resources to make sure that everyone is satisfied or their needs will be satisfied. Growth over time, so it's the nation. So in short, our growth is not only uh, nakadepende sa government, but it depends on all of us. Okay. So the four basic economic questions are actually taken from uh, okay. So the four basic economic questions: what to produce, okay. So how to produce those goods and services, how much are we going to produce, and for whom are we producing them? So these are the four basic economic questions. So in economics, we have two types schools of thought. So we have the positive economics and normative economics. So when you say positive economics, so they are trying to explain economic events as they are. Okay. So an example of this is, for example, currently we are experiencing an inflation of 4.2%. Okay. So it's inana ra ang pag-explain. So inana ra pagka-describe. Walay walay other kuan. Okay. So it's just describe what is happening, but wala na dayon. Normative economics, it tells us what should be done, okay? Or what should say tawag gani, what should be the better way, okay? So murag maghatag siya og analysis and consultation. Like for example, so we have an inflation rate of 4.2%. So what will we do to decrease the goods, to decrease the inflation? So perhaps increase the supply, help the farmers, uh, put a price ceiling. So these are the normative economic, the recommendations from the normative economics, because we're trying to not only describe unsay situation nato, but what will we do with our situation para ma-better siya. So ceteris paribus, so all other things held constant. So muna pasabot sa ceteris paribus. And this is very important because in all the laws that we are trying to study or we're trying to absorb, without this phrase, wrong na dayon ang law. Okay? So for example, law of demand states that uh, as the price increases, the quantity supply decreases. Okay? Or vice versa. Okay? So, di ba, ina na ang law of demand. So, is it correct? Okay, tama ba akong gikuan? State that the law of demand is um, when the price increases, the quantity demanded uh, decreases. Okay, so correct ba na siya?
Yes, sir. Tama, sir.
Actually, that is wrong.
Ay,
Okay? Nganong wrong? Nganong namali? Nganong namali siya? Wala tay ceteris paribus. Okay? The law of demand will only be correct if ang kada ra nga factor ang atong ginatanaw. Price lang atong ginatanaw nga factor nganong na change ang quantity demanded. Because remember, there are other factors that will change the quantity demanded, the quantity demanded. Dili lang ang price ang reason. Okay? So if everything is changing, all the factors are changing, then the law of demand nga kung walay ceteris paribus is wrong. So that is why it's very important that naay ceteris paribus paguman. So the law of demand will only be correct if there is a ceteris paribus nga phrase or all other things held constant. But I could not blame you kay nga of course most of you inana gyud ang kuan nga correct, di ba? Because daghan kog nakita nga fault pud sa mga previous nga MAS questions sa economics. So they only state those phrase but without adding the word ceteris paribus, okay? Or other things held constant. But okay, but of course I want you to give the truth. So the fact, so mo na siya. So the law of demand will only be correct if you add the word, or the law of demand and law of supply will only be correct if there is an addition phrase nga ceteris paribus. Okay? Without the phrase, it will be the law of demand and law of supply will be incorrect. Okay? But for board exam purposes, so kung walay inana nga mga, kung tanaw ninyo sa choices, walay mga all other things held constant, so you just choose what is the best answer. Ang pinakaduol. So microeconomics, so we only deals with the individual dilemma. Okay? So individual dilemma on how to allocate the limited resources to satisfy their own wants and needs. While the macroeconomics deals with the nation. So problems a nation on how to allocate their limited resources to satisfy all the nation's needs. So types of economic systems. So we have the traditional economy, so also known as the family consumption. So that's the basic type of economy. We have the command economy. So it's mostly dictated by the government. So all our resources, so is all dictated by the government. Market economy, so it's privately owned. So privately owned. So most of our businesses are owned by private individuals. The mixed economy, the command economy is also known as is kuan siya in complement with the communist political system, okay, communism. While the market economy is best complemented by the democratic form of government. While mixed economy, so it's a hybrid of command. So some enterprises are owned by the government while the others are owned by the private entities. So it is best complemented by the socialist form of government. So the socialist, an example of a socialist government is sa Russia. Okay? So in socialism, so key enterprises are owned by government. So these are mostly katong mga electricity, mga water, even internet. Okay? So broadband. So these are owned by the government. So going back to history, so Adam Smith is the father of economics. So he authored a book uh, titled The Wealth of Nations. So The Wealth of Nation talks about this invisible hand. Na maski daw magkaniun sa ang economy, it will go back to its correct nga or into its normal situation. So neoclassical, it's more on the market system inefficiencies. So the neoclassical economics um, actually opposes what Adam Smith believed, that the market system uh, has its inefficiencies. And then see Keynes, so Maynard Keynes, so it's one of the most influential nga economists. So the Keynesian theory, so it talks about the theory of the unemployment, interest, and money. So when we talk about unemployment in general, it does not only refer to people, okay, or the labor. Unemployment talks about all the unutilized factors of production. So unutilized nga land, unutilized nga capital, and even unutilized nga entrepreneurial ability of the people. So But most often, so the unemployment is referred to the labor, okay, unemployment. But in general, unemployment talks about the unutilization or the underutilization of all our factors of production. So katong land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. So Maynard Keynes also talks about the interest, so the role of interest and money. So si Keynes is has a very big influence in our monetary policy. So ang iyang mga theory ang ginagamit karon sa mga bangko sentral, sa mga central banks all around the world. So every time nga na recession, so if you notice, so they lower the interest, or if na ay inflation, they increase the interest. So we'll talk about that nga nung ginana sa BSP. And why the limited while the economy has limited money circulation. Nga nung di man sila pwede mag-produce og more money. Okay? What is the impact if we produce a lot of money in the economy? So now let's move to the one of the major nga topic, diba, that we need to be familiar with economics, and that is the law of demand and supply. So most of the topics under economics, so medyo nakafocus sila ani nga demand, ani nga mga laws. Okay, so the demand refers to the behavior of the consumers. So market, so ang definition nato sa market, it is actually not a place, but it's a demand for a good or service. So that is why every time you in the business world, so if the competitors are sharing in the market, so muna na sila ginatawag nga the market share. Okay, so because the demand for all the goods and services for that product is shared by the competitors or the producers. So methods of demand analysis, so you can use any of the following to analyze the demand. So you can use the demand schedule. So it's a table sa kuan lang na siya. Table sa quantity demand o sa price. Then the demand curve, so kana inyo nakita nga picture, that's the demand curve. Demand function, so we have a demand function, how to calculate the demand. So in this figure, as we can see, so it's a straight line siya, 'di ba? But 'di ba it's curve, okay? So in reality, it's not really a straight line. It's forming a conjugate curve. So law of demand states that as the price goes lower, the quantity demanded goes higher. So take note, there's a difference between demand and quantity demand. Okay, so ang law of demand only states that the price goes lower if the quantity demanded goes higher. As the price goes lower, the quantity demanded goes higher, or as the price goes higher, the quantity demanded goes lower. Okay, so take note, I add the phrase ceteris paribus. Again, without this phrase, this will not be a correct statement. So function, so the formula in getting the quantity demanded, so that's A. So it's the fixed nga unit, nga regardless of the quantity mo, gyud na siya ang constant nga number minus the slope, okay, multiplied by the price. Okay? So price of that good. So notice that nga minus atong gigamit, it's because they have an inversely kumbaga the relationship between the price and the quantity demanded is inversely proportional. So munang minus ang gigamit. So magka-decrease as the price increases. So let's differentiate quantity demand, change in quantity demand versus the change in demand. So ang change in quantity demand is only brought by the change in price of that good. So kung ang na-change lang is the price of that good, Ang nahitabo lang is change in quantity demand. So the effect is only a movement along the curve. So same ang curve but nag-change ang quantity demand. So walay change of the entire curve or the shift. If price lang atong gihisgutan niya, nag-change. But there would be a change in demand if other factors aside from the price of that good will change. So pag nanagan ni other factors, so it will shift the demand. So either upward. So kung upward siya, it's a positive because it means that the demand increases. If there is a downward shift, so it's a negative. So what are those forces that can cause the demand curve to change? So number one, taste or preferences. Okay, so the taste and preferences of the market changes over time. Sometimes it's very dynamic. Okay, so it's changing all the time. Okay, so for example, for the cell phone industry, so we know nga every now and then, so magka-add ang feature, so magka-increase pod ang need sa tao using the cell phone. So that's why the cell phone is constantly changing its product to cater those tastes and preferences. Second is the changing incomes. So of course, in times of recession, people are more uh, changing their spending habits. So instead of buying mga luxury goods, so they choose to save their money or spend their money only for mga necessities. Third is occasional or seasonal products. So there are products nga you do not buy them often. So there's a particular season nga ginabay lang nimo sila. Okay? So example ani is during summer, so you tend to buy more uh, cold products or the mga ice cream, mga halo-halo. But in times of mga uh, La Nina or mga cold weather season, so we tend to buy hot goods, so mga coffee, soup, and so on. Population change, so if there's an increase in the population, so for example, if the population now is consist of mga old na nga people, so the demand will shift. Okay, or perhaps the population becomes more or is now more composed of individual millennials or the the digital natives. So ang mga batch nga nagsunod sa ato, so they will have a change in their koan, change of the types of goods that they want to buy. So for example, the millennials are based on study are more likely to buy experience. So what are these experience? Travel, food, and other things nga dili siya ka material, okay, but more on ko anyo siya experience. Whereas katong before the generation nga atong gisundan, so they are more likely a population generation that will buy goods like mga material things. Substitute and complementary goods. So a substitute is a good nga imong paliton kung dili nimo afford ang isa. So that's what we call substitute. Complementary goods is you will buy this one. Okay? So di ka pwede nga mo dili ka mo palit ana if you do not buy the product. Okay? So for example, if you want to buy uh, desktop, so daghan na siya mga parts nga dapat nimo paliton. So for example, if you are studying, so the complementary goods are the books, the supplies. So expectations of future prices. So just like what happened during the pandemic, 'di ba? Sa first month sa pandemic. So we are expecting that the prices of the mass, okay, will increase. So we tend to hoard, so the demand increases. or or for example our case today kato mga hogs. So because of the African swine flu, so nagmahal ang mga meat, pork meat. So kana, okay? So the demand will shift because more will demand because of the possible shortage. So after the demand, so let's now talk about the supply. So the supply is the study of the behavior of our sellers or the producers. So same thing with the demand. So we can analyze through the following. We can use the supply schedule, supply curve, and the supply function. So take note that the difference only with the demand and supply function is the change of the operation, di ba? So again na nag-minus ta karon addition. So same formula but get changed to plus. So it's because the relationship between the price of the goods and the supply, quantity supplied, is directly proportional. Okay? So hence we have the function quantity S equals A plus BP. So again, law of supply, the price is directly related to quantity supplied. So pasabot ana, if the price increases, more producers or sellers would like to supply. If the price decreases, then suppliers would are more prone to decreasing their quantity supply. Okay. So of course, add the phrase ceteris paribus because it's not only the price that affects the quantity, the supply rather. However, just one comment lang with the graph of the sa gigamit nga graph sa economics. So it's actually a violation sa mathematical nga formula, di ba? Mathematical nga concept. Kaya di ba, we tend to put the x-axis kaning abscissa sa katong um, independent, di ba? Independent variable. Di ba? Dapat ang independent variable naa sa x-axis or the horizontal axis, while the dependent variable or the y should be in the y-axis. Okay? But notice, baliktad. The price is not a dependent variable. It's an independent variable. Quantity supplied is the independent, the dependent variable. Okay? So although that's a there's a mathematical mistake, but mo na magwinaandan sa mga economists. Okay? So that's actually an exemption from the koan. Same with the law of demand. So change in quantity supplied versus the change in supply. So the change in quantity supplied is only caused by the change in price of that same good or same particular good. The effect is only a movement along the supply curve. So it's only a movement along the supply curve. Wala na change ang direction sa supply curve. Maura gyapon, what is changing is uh, the quantity supplied. Change in supply, so it means other factors are causing the change. Okay? So other factors than the change in price of that good is changing. So the movement could either be a leftward. So leftward meaning it's a negative, meaning ni decrease ang overall supply. If it is rightward shift, then it is a positive effect. Okay? So meaning ana, the overall supply increased. So what are those forces or factors that may cause the supply curve to change? So number one is the optimization in the use of factors of production. So for example, if there's a better way of producing those factors of production, then it will cause the supply to increase. So for example, in the Industrial Revolution, so it's more on labor intensive. Okay, so dili kayo kuan og machine. So mo nang the output is lower. But if we try to use the machine, okay, so our output will significantly increase. So hence the supply will also increase. So letter B is technological change. So with the use of technology, so it can increase the supply. Future expectations. So just like what happens in demand, so if there are future expectations nga kailangan mag-produce og more goods. So for example, the companies need to produce more face masks, more face shields, vaccines. So it will cause the supply curve to change. Number of sellers. So if there is only one seller, of course, you need to produce more. But if there are a lot of sellers, so the output must be lower. Weather conditions. So it will affect the supply curve. So especially in the agricultural nga products, so the weather conditions can affect the supply of those goods. Government policy, so it could be in the form of taxation, mga economic nga mga barriers, laws nga gi-implement nila, so that has an impact to the supply curve. So for example, with the upcoming law, so katong create, so it is expected that the corporation will now pay lower tax rates, so from 30% to 25%. So it is expected that more output will be produced because of the tax savings. Okay, so you can ask questions up. Basig na, kuan na, paspas na. Okay, so let's talk about the market equilibrium. So the market equilibrium only happens when the quantity demanded is equals to the quantity supplied. So that's what we call the equilibrium. However, if most of the time dili nato na siya ma-achieve, so most of the time the quantity demand is higher or perhaps the quantity supplied is higher. So if the quantity demand is higher compared sa supply or the quantity supplied, then the situation is called a shortage. Okay? Or if the demand is higher or is lower compared to the supply, then we are experiencing a surplus. So let's look at this graph. So kaning pula, this refers to demand, the demand curve, while the blue line is for the supply. So kanang point nga nag-intersect ang duha, that's what we call the equilibrium. So if taas ang supply kaysa sa demand, so there is what we call surplus, kaning nasa taas. And then if there is a shortage, so the demand is higher compared sa supply, then kaning nasa ubos niya. Okay, ubos sa market equilibrium. Now, according to Adam Smith, maski daw kunog na ay shortage or surplus, eventually the market will correct itself. So, giunsaon pag-correct. So, kung taas ang supply kaysa sa demand, so kung mo ni ang price na adiri nga level, so the market will always correct itself by decreasing its price. So, magka-decrease siya until mo achieve sa market equilibrium. So, over time, the market the surplus will become in the market equilibrium nga situation. Same with the shortage. So the market will correct itself. So kung naay shortage, the tendency of the market is to increase the price. Okay? So i-increase sa mga supplier ang price to the point nga moabot na sa market equilibrium. So samtang wala ta kaabot sa market equilibrium, kung naay surplus, it will continue to go down. And if there's a shortage, it will continue to go up. Okay. However, the market equilibrium does not mean nga mo gina siya ideal nga situation because naay mga effect or naay mga negative effect ana sa mga producers and our consumers. Like for example, if nag-exceed ang supply kaysa demand, so ang ma-hurt ani ang mga producers or sellers because they will now have lower profits. And if you are a consumer, you don't want nga magsigig increase ang price sa goods. So you do not wait nga maabot siya sa market equilibrium because it will hurt your financial nga situation. So what the government do para makuha na, ma-solve na siya nga problem is through the use of the price floor and the price ceiling. So price floor, so this happens when there is a surplus. So ginagamit ra sa government ang price floor if there is a surplus of goods. So it is usually implemented to protect the sellers from getting very low profits. So for example, ang mga farmers, kung dagan sila ma-produce, so of course, that is detrimental for our farmers. So the price floor will be set by the government para dili na siya muubos. Okay? So it will protect the farmers or the sellers. The price ceiling is only done when there is a shortage. So this is to prevent the abuse of sellers to charge very high prices, especially during crisis. So namagay uban nga mo take advantage, especially mga cartels. So it results to permanent shortage. So to avoid the abuse, so recently lang we have heard that the government issued a price ceiling sa atong mga prices of pork. So the purpose of that is to protect the consumers and to prevent the abuse of sellers. However, the price floor and price ceiling will cause a permanent shortage. The price floor will cause a permanent surplus, basta dili pa siya i-lift, and it will cause a permanent shortage kung price ceiling until nga i-lift na sa government ang price floor or price ceiling. So until then, it will cause permanent surplus, permanent shortage. So let's talk about the elasticity. Okay, so elasticity is about the responsiveness or the sensitivity of the demand to the change in the factor. Okay, so number one type of elasticity is called the demand elasticity or the response of the buyers when regards to the change in the price. Okay, so we have many types of elasticity. So you have the price elasticity. So ang factor lang nga nag-change ani is the change in price. So we are trying to analyze whether uh, the good is sensitive to price changes. So the formula in getting the elasticity of demand is get the percentage change in the quantity demand. So that's quantity 2 minus quantity 1 over quantity 1. So that's the percentage change in quantity demand over the percentage change in price or P2 minus P1 over P1. You can use the arc elasticity but I don't recommend to use this kay medyo kuan. So stick na lang ta sa katong more simpler nga formula. However, the arc elasticity is used to get a more accurate nga kuan nga result but the difference is not that really kuan significant. So interpretation, so if the quantity demand, the percentage in quantity demand is higher compared sa price, so or the elasticity is greater than 1, okay, it means that the good is price elastic. Okay, it is price elastic, meaning it is very sensitive to the change in price. So for managers, dili sila basta-basta pa-increase of price without affecting their profits. Okay? But if the the result is -1 or less than 1, okay, not negative, less than 1, okay, the good is said to be price inelastic. So si pasabot niya that the change in price is dili kaayo siya inana ka significant ang impact sa quantity demand. So in this type of goods, so pwede ka makapa-increase og price. Okay? Other type of elasticity is called the income elasticity. So ang na-change lang same formula, ang ato lang gi-add is ang denominator nato is now percentage change in income. Okay? So that's Y2. So so ang income is denoted by letter Y. So Y2 minus Y1 over Y1. So that's the percentage change in income. So what would be the purpose nga nung kailangan ta magkuha og income elasticity? So if the income elasticity is greater than 1, it is said to be a normal good. So meaning, as the income of the people increases, the quantity demand for that good also increases. However, if the result is less than 1, so the income elasticity is less than 1, the good is actually called, or the good is an inferior good. So the characteristic of an inferior good, so as income rises or our income increases, the quantity demand for that good is decreasing. Okay. Okay, so the other type of elasticity is called the cross price elasticity of demand. So we're trying to analyze what is the relationship of that good to this good. So for example, si good X and quantity Y. So cross price elasticity. So to get the cross price elasticity, so the percentage change in the quantity demand of X. So of that good, i-divide nimo sa percentage change in the price of another good. So let us say si good Y. So again, quantity demand is X, price of another good. So if the result is positive, so ang makuha nimo nga cross price elasticity is positive. Okay? So it is a substitute good. So pasabot niya nga the quantity demand of X will increase kung mutaas ang price ni Y, 'di ba? Kung mataas ang price ni Y, definitely ang quantity demand ni Y decreases. But since nag-increase man si X, then this is a substitute good of product Y. And vice versa. If the result is negative, so based sa imo cross price elasticity, the result is negative, then that is not a substitute but a complementary good. Okay, so complementary na siya nga good. Meaning that every time you buy that good, so you will also buy that particular good. Okay, so now we're done with the elasticity of demand. Let's go to the elasticity of supply. So what is only important in the elasticity of supply is the katong change in price lang. Okay, so the percentage, this is not quantity D ha, this is quantity S. Okay, so percentage change in quantity S over the percentage change in price. So if higher than 1, elastic supply. If lower, inelastic supply. Now we have extremes. Okay, so in understanding the elasticity, we have some extremes. So it's both demand and supply. So we have what we call the perfectly inelastic. So unsa maitsuraan ng perfectly inelastic? Okay, so a perfectly inelastic has a horizontal nga line. Okay? Horizontal siya because ano, not horizontal but vertical. Okay? Ang perfectly inelastic is vertical. So the reason is regardless of the price nga iset sa economy sa mga producers, so the demand for that good is always the same. So that is why vertical ang iyang shape. So pag vertical, it's called perfectly inelastic. So an example nga product nga medyo duol ana nga condition is the medicine for cancer patients. So regardless kung pilay amount ana, there will always be a constant demand for that medicine. Another extreme is called the perfectly elastic. So kung gaina is vertical, perfectly elastic has a horizontal nga line, horizontal. So regardless of the quantity demand, the price is already set. Okay? So naka-fix na ang price kung unsa to'y cost nga na kuan, na incur. So that's the kuan. So for example, is the trip to outer space or a trip to Mars. So maski unsa ang demand but the cost is set or naka-fix na siya. So short run supply. So we're talking about the production. So it tends the price to be inelastic because of the limited capacity. So of course, in the production, they have limited machines, they have limited human talents. So it will cause the price to be inelastic. However, in the long run supply, it tends to be price elastic because na mga additional capital. Okay, so over time you will add more capital, so you can produce more goods. Another concept that we must be familiar is the utility theory. So, 'di ba, what the economics is trying to solve is to satisfy our wants and needs. Okay, so the utility refers to that satisfaction. Okay, so refers to the satisfaction or pleasure that an individual or consumer gets from the consumption of a good or service that they purchase. So marginal utility is the additional satisfaction that you get every time you consume. And total utility is the total satisfaction. So with that, so we have the law of diminishing marginal utility. So it's the law of diminishing marginal utility, meaning it's a decline in the satisfaction for goods and services. So for example, you are eating, so going back to eat all you can. So of course, kung busog kayo ka, ay kung gutom kayo ka, your first plate, okay, plate of foods will satisfy you most. Na kung mag-add na po kag another, so your satisfaction gets lower. Okay? Each time you consume more, so ang imong marginal utility is getting lower and lower. So that's what we call the law of diminishing marginal utility. So the marginal utility is expressed in this formula. So change in the total utility over the change in the quantity. So kung na change sa quantity, so mo na i-kuan mo, set as denominator. The concept of consumer surplus. So if your expected price is higher compared to the actual price, it is said that the consumer have a consumer surplus. So, di ba kabantay mo every time nga mo palita and you do not know the price, you're already calculating sa inyong mind kung pila kay possible price ani nga good. Now, if your expected price is higher compared to the actual price, mo nang moingon ka og barato. Pero kung mas taas gani ang actual price kaysa sa expected price, musulti ka nga mahal. Okay? So the consumer surplus is actually taking advantage by the sellers. or the salespeople or the marketing people. So they try to trick you that there is a consumer surplus when in fact wala. So for example, buy one and take one, or discounts or sales. So these methods trick the mind of the consumers that they are actually getting a consumer surplus. Okay, most of the time, pag natay consumer surplus, mas dali ta i-convince to buy the goods. Okay? The indifference curve. So if the satisfaction of good A is the same satisfaction with good B, then it's what we call equal satisfaction. So there's an indifference between the two goods. So marginal rate of substitution. So how much of good Y will be given up to get good X? So for example, let's say your good X is your review, your good Y is your sleep. So how much of the good Y are you willing to sacrifice just to get the or experience the review or discussion proper? So that's called the marginal rate of substitution, or vice versa perhaps. So ang good Y would be your review, or your good X would be your sleep. So how much of the review time would you give up just to get a good night's sleep? Okay, production and cost. So this refers to the problem of the sellers or producers. So we have stated gaina, in the short run production, all inputs, all materials are composed of variable and fixed. Okay, variable and fixed. So for example, you are producing something, so magpalit kag machine, factory ang space sa imong factory is limited. The output that you can produce is also limited because you only have few machines or uh, few labor. However, in the long run, all inputs will become variable because if you have the resources available, so you can, kung dili kaya i-produce, so you will just buy more machines, increase your factory or build another factory, hire more workers, so everything will become variable. So production function. So for example, you're producing t-shirt. So your Q is t-shirt. So all the factors of production that you use to produce the t-shirt, so example, fabric, sewing machine, sewer, etc. So so in short, these are all the inputs that you have used to produce the t-shirt. Marginal product. So it's a change in the total product over the change in your input. Okay, so average product is the total product over the input. Now, sa production and cost, the important law that we have to be familiar with is the law of diminishing returns. Now, usually raba ang law of diminishing returns is confused with the law of diminishing marginal utility. The law of diminishing marginal utility talks about the demand or the behavior of the consumers, while the law of diminishing returns is about the behavior of the sellers. So sa production ni siya nga ma-apply ang law of diminishing returns. According to the law of diminishing returns, the marginal product will get lower and lower as we put more inputs. Okay, so ang product daw nga imong ma-produce over time, or the difference in the product each time you produce will become lower and lower. Okay. So increasing returns, so also known as the economies of scale. So you are increasing your inputs and then lowering your outputs. So we have the market structures. Okay, okay pa ba mo? So actually, it's a summary of all koan.
Okay pa si
Okay, so,
Gerson, sir.
okay pa? Okay pa si Gerson, ang uban.
Naman si John,
Okay
sir.
pa,
Na
sir.
si John, sir.
Jan, na. Okay, so, okay, padayon ta.
Sige.
So market structure, so the first type of market structure is the perfect competition. So unsa may characteristics sa perfect competition? So the sellers and buyers are well informed. There is identical product and no barriers or limitations to entering or leaving the market. So just like all perfect, so they do not exist, di ba? So in the market structure, so seldom ra gyud ang makaabot sa, or in fact wala tayo pwede ma-record niya as perfect competition niya market nga nag-exist. So these are the conditions. Dapat well-informed ang seller o buyer, the product is identical, and there is no barrier or limitations when they enter or leave the market. So probably ang very close lang sa perfect competition is the stock exchange. Okay? So it is said that the sellers and buyers are mostly informed. The products that they sell or the stocks are identical, and we can just especially now, so affordable na mo sulod sa stock exchange or muhawa sa stock exchange. So characteristics ni perfect competition, so yeah, there's a large number of small firms. So dagay small firms, homogeneous ang product, so meaning very very same, very identical ang product nga gisell. Very easy and entry and exit in the market. The second type of market structure is called the monopoly. So there's only one seller, the product is unique, the entry is impossible, and most of the advertising is non-competitive. So it's more on the information campaign lang. So example ani mga water districts or Aneco, Meralco. So these companies are uh, mga monopoly nga mga companies. So if they advertise, they do not do it for competition, but they do it for information campaign. Oligopoly, so the third structure, so characteristic niya is there are few sellers, so gamay ra ang namaligya. The products are homogeneous, it could be homogeneous, so identical or differentiated product. Okay, so differentiated product meaning lahi-lahi na ay difference ang mga products nga ilang gisell. Difficult to enter the market, and the competition is also non-price. So they are not lowering their prices of their goods just to compete with its competitors. So of course, our famous example aning oligopoly is our telco, okay? Telecommunication yung mga companies. So Smart and Globe, or PLDT and Globe. Okay, so they have homogeneous product, and it is not easy to enter the telecommunications. So then their competition is about introducing their products, but not really on kanang kinsay pinakabarato or kinsay cheapest o kuan cost. Fourth structure is called the monopolistic competition. So mo ni ang kasagaran. So kanang mga sa grocery, so they are actually mga monopolistic competition. So the so Monopolistic competition and perfect competition have similar characteristics. However, nag-differ lang sila sa product because in the perfect competition, it is homogeneous. But in the monopolistic competition, they have differentiated product. Like for example, sa mga toothpaste, so although parehas na sila tanan og toothpaste, pero laylay sila og feature. Okay, uban nga na ay sana na charcoal, na salt, or masig unsa na lang na fluoride. So their products are differentiated. But it is very easy to enter the market and very easy also to exit the market. So mga sabon, so laylay ang sabon. The other type of market structure is called the monopsony. So it's actually the opposite of monopoly. Okay? Sa monopsony, isa lang ka buyer, but there are many sellers. Okay? So sa may example ani nga situation. So especially kung naay mga infra ang government, okay? So of course the government is just a single buyer. Isa ra siya pero it's very influential. So katong mga bidders, so they are the sellers. So mas dako og power si single buyer kung kinsa iyang pilion sa nga seller. So that's an example of monopsony. Okay, so let's pause for a while for some questions or clarifications before tamu proceed sa macroeconomics.
Question daw, bay.
Happy birthday, bye!
Okay, you can use the chat box to ask questions.
Sige, sir. Mo-chat ra si Gerson dira, sir.
Kaya kasi maulaw mo. Maulaw pa day mo. Questions, clarifications. Okay, mas heavy ra ba na yung macroeconomics kaysa sa micro?
Question niyo, kay wala kay question, bay?
Wala lagi, bye!
Ay, si Carlo, kay daghan ni question gitibo. Na, nagsulat gid siya, sir. Gitibo ang question.
Sige, Carlo, unsa man na?
Uy, si Denmark sila.
Na, si Zap. Daghan kay question si Zap.
Unsa man na? Walay question kay nakasabot or walay question kay wala nasabtan?
I think
Wala
nag-absorb
naka... Ha?
nag-absorb
Dili
ka.
lang.
Gabi ka, condense kayo, no? Nga, kuan. Alangan, isabi ato ka semestre.
Padayon na lang, sir.
Ang subject.
Tulo ka economics. Okay, so let's have a kuansa kana break first. So mga 10 minutes lang siguro para kuan.
Sige, sir.
So let's go back na yun after 10
Happy
minutes.
birthday, Den.
Birthday Denmark.
Wow, thank you, guys.
So man na pa food panda dira.
Piti hilom.
No, yun siya ang bata nila.
Isa ng bata dira.
Naka-zap.
Sige, so kuan sa let's we'll go back after 10 minutes. Okay, so,
Sige, sir.
break lang sa. So
Nice kay pagkawala ba? Kaya pag-abot na ako.
Late day ka na.
Gainar ako si Kuan. Gikan ako sa cellphone, ni laptop na pod. Wag
Mo
ko
ba ka?
dito ko ni Sir ipasod. Ano pa kung nga i-accept? Gay Joy, gainar ako wala una.
Ano siya, basa?
Wa sa ni basa sa kuan diri sa katong chat box. Himusta naman mo? Guys.
Happy birthday, de.
Jerson,
Yes, Zap.
Carlo.
Oh.
Numbok na Naol kaon-kaon. Sa kinitindahan. Taas
Ano
niyo
naligo, Zap?
discuss. Ha?
Ako naligo.
Unsa daw?
Ako mo naligo.
Sa CR ko
Naligo
naligo. Naligo ba?
Lisod, sad.
Ano, naligo mong dagat?
Hi, Jamie!
Hi, Jam.
Hey, mag-milk kita sa inyo ha, Jambe. Nara kang buton, Gerson?
Wala, yun ako tag-white.
Ay na. Lagong tata sa nami. Tingog po diha, Jam. Unsa naman ni, eh? Ano kang bol? Carlo?
Ah.
Oh, what have you, Gerson, ha?
Yeah.
Ay, top notcher, ba? Si Carlo sa pre-board nila. Grabe, ni sa
Wala pa po
REO. My God, sana all
Gago.
REO. Di mo say. Hi, Jam. Sige, si Jam, eh.
Hi, Zap.
Hi, Jamie.
Ay, Jam.
Ano mo ni sila, nag-off cam man ni sila, Maris?
Nag-on na ng pan ba, no?
Paulaw.
Hi, Trisha. Nasa CB118 ni Trisha. CB118, oh.
Ano na eh?
Wala na yung maapas. Kita na yun.
Ay, Trish.
Sarnal. Pero nag-left mo po ni sila.
Ay naman dahil si Kuano, si Doreen.
Oh, napon si Doreen.
Ay,
Doreen, ano mo si Doreen? Doreen. Kinsa pa man na diri.
Ila.
Maoran.
Wow.
Who is not presenting? Ay. Ay, hatag mong trabaho, be. Miss Doreen, oh. Ka-social, kanay pakuan. Headphone.
Wala si Dorin rin.
Sabi ka presto kay
Ay,
background.
Doreen. Nag-REO, mampug ka, no? Sige. Nice talking. Picture sa pud mo? Picture sa pud mo?
Seryo?
Kanang naata tanan. O niya nang nasiserdan.
Sige. I-on yung camera niya. Picture din ta.
Yes.
Pardon, sana.
Wala tanda si Roland Rick eh. Uli nila siya.
Oh, Carlo, triplets. What a three camera. What a three camera.
Lagyan siya ng tulo-tulo ka camera. Hindi kami
Ang
po.
bukabaluan ng
Check, ulo.
tuloy mong camera, Carlo. Ay, tulo ka buo.
Sana
Ako,
all
saan
sa camera.
Ano ba ang cellphone?
Ay, Jam.
Ay, gusto lang snap.
Si Carlo. Sige, nagkaon. Kasi may kaon, Carlo. Hi, Preng.
Wow, Frank. Hey, Frank.
Si Maris lagi, wala gini makita. Ano man na? Unsa man na?
Di ko lagi.
Iko.
Din. Naka-register na mo din.
Ha?
Naka-register na mo.
Register.
Naka-review ba? Ay, review para board.
Wala pa. Ay, magkuha na lang og NOVA. Naka-register mo ko sa una. Ako lang, i-follow ko ang NOVA. Ayaw mo na og gikuha.
Kisa may, ikaw ka mo rin daw may mo sorsor or napay. Ikaw do rin mo take mo ka no? Nice talking siguro rin. Ay.
Ako na story.
Ikaw doon rin.
Hindi ba mo parang camera ay anak ang hindi ma-adjust. Param pam 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 param pam pam. Param.
Ay, nindot lagi snack si During.
Sana snap.
Wala pa yung mga dira, ah?
Wow, Jerson. Kaman si Jan.
May-exit mong guro, ano daw?
Murag.
Yan.
Be. Naaraman. Ay.
Hot snap.
Isa daw.
Snap. Sino nag-code?
Jamie.
What? Snap, Carlo?
Ha?
Putol-putol
Snap,
naman.
snap.
Snack daw. Snack.
Aw.
Say aw. Aw.
What naman?
Nag-goal ka, Carlo. Son, siguro may dula diri son.
Naol.
Kumansad. Ako po.
Volleyball.
Volleyball,
Skylar
basketball.
Ni abot
Kaya
na
nga,
diri ako
Carlson.
sa ni abot diri. Sa daw game Carlo.
Mutik nakakaroon. May.
Sana all
Register na ka.
mag-bridge.
Take lang good. Bisag. Why review?
At
Feeling
Ay,
on.
masuggest yun na akong Rio, gid. Promise.
Carlo,
Wala. Nag-enroll, Jason?
Carlo,
Ah,
kanta sa daw.
diwo. Ano ba lugar?
May iko lagi na.
Hindi mo na mag-iko-iko dira.
Ako pa tingog. Ano?
Okay, let's continue.
Wala.
Ay, sir.
Kalit.
Ay, sir.
Hi sir. Sige, off
Hi,
mic
sir.
lang.
Sige. Okay, so macroeconomics. So macroeconomics is the study of how we can best increase our country's wealth. So given the available resources, so katong mga factors of production, so like land, labor, and capital, and how these resources are transformed by our entrepreneurs into final goods and services. then which we ultimately consume to satisfy our needs and wants. So the country's wealth is measured by our gross domestic product. Okay, so gross domestic product, or kung apil ang goods and services produced outside the country by Filipino citizens. So that's the GNP, or the gross national product. So production possibilities frontier. So it represents the outcome or production combination that can be produced with a given amount of resources. So kumbaga, what is the best mix of resources that we can maximize, or who will give the most outcome or most number of quantity given with this number of resources. So complex circular flow model. So gayon na nag-discuss tag circular flow model. Now kung i-consider nato ang tanan resources inside the country, so we will have this circular flow model. So medyo di lang kayo klaro, pero so wait lang. Okay, so kaya na nag-discuss ta sa katong circular flow model. So actually katuning kaning naa diri sa bottom, di ba? Na na product market, na factor market, household sector, and the business sector. So that's the circular inner circular flow, naputay outer circular flow. So the expenditures, money used by the company, the households to buy in the product. So ang inner circular flow are flow of goods and services, while sa outside it's the flow of the money. Now, if you consider the other factors, so dili lang ta mga household o business, so apil na ang foreign sector, apil na ang government sector, the role of the capital market. So this is the circular flow model would look like. So let's begin with the household. So ang atong household dili lang sa akong ma-receive niya iyang money, ang income. So not all of them will be spent for the goods and services. Some of the money will be used to save or invest. Some of the money will be used to pay taxes to the government. Okay, so ang savings mapadung na siya sa capital market. So your savings, our savings can either be used to loan para sa businesses, gamiton ang kwarta para mapaloan sa businesses, or perhaps they will use our money as kumbaga capital, as an investment. So ang capital market, so they are these mga stock markets, bond markets, financial institutions. So they are the ones facilitating the flow of money from the savings to the business sector. So and then at our business sector, so ang atong business sector, of course, they're also paying taxes to the government. So so all these taxes nga gibayad sa household ug sa business sectors, so it will be used to buy government purchases. So it's not we talk about government purchases, so bayad sa gamiton nga money to build infra, to provide services, to give salary to the all government workers. So dira siya manggikan. So the primary source of revenue of the government is from our taxes. So that's why it's called the blood of our of our economy. However, aside from the taxes, so we can also uh, buy goods and services outside the country. So the government can also import goods or perhaps can export goods. So so by the way, katong sa government di ay, so katong tanan kwarta dili lang to siya gamiton to pay to buy purchases, but also it will be used by the government to transfer payments and also to provide social services, so such as mga pensions and retirement fees. So I mean retirement funds, okay, or in case of mga health assistance and other social services. So going to the household sectors. So sometimes the government purchases ang iyang mga government purchases dili lang sa foreign, but most of its purchases come from our business sectors. Okay? So di sila magkuha og goods. Our business sector will also import and export goods to foreign, okay, to the foreign sector. So it's not only the government but also the business sectors and also the household sectors ang ga-import export mga foreign. So every time nga mag-online sell ta tapos ang imong good gikan pa sa China or sa other country. So that's an example of the flow of the goods coming from the foreign sector, and you transfer money, you transfer payment to those entities. So national income accounting. So kung atong businesses na atay profit, okay, natay net income, now our national income accounting is measured by our gross domestic product or the gross national product. So that is why it's very important. The economists will always look for the GDP. Okay. So the national income accounting is the system used to measure the aggregate income and expenditures for a nation. So it can either be GDP or GNP. The most widely used measure is the GDP. So it is the total market or money value of all the final goods and services produced in an economy over a period of 1 year. So take note, we are only accounting for the money value of all the final goods and services. So tanan nga goods nga services nga dili pa final, let's say mga raw materials nga for further processing pa, wala na siya na-appeal sa GDP. So we will only measure the final goods and services. So especially those goods, kani nga mga goods, mo ni ang moabot sa mga consumers. Okay? So the GDP excludes the production abroad by the Philippine businesses and overseas Filipino workers. So ang GDP wala pay labot ang na-produce sa ato ang mga businesses or mga overseas sa outside. However, for GNP computation, apilon ang market value or money value of all final goods and services produced by all the nation's residents. Okay? So katong mga OFW na to, mga income nila, so dito siya makompute sa GNP. And also some of the, kung natin mga Filipino business outside, so their income will also be computed in the GNP. Pero sa GDP walay labot because ang GDP only measures all the output inside the country. Okay, the final goods and services inside the country. So what are the limitations when we use this measure? So first, it is measured only in money or market or money value. So not all goods and services inside the country are measured in money or market value. So for example, the less pollution, the sleep and relaxation, these are goods. Recreation are also goods. Entertainment is also a good. However, some of them are very difficult to convert into money value. Okay? Second, it only counts new domestic production. So the GDP only counts the new domestic production. So katong mga na-produce last year nga wa nabaligya, so wala na siya gi-take into account. So only those new product produced goods in entire year ang na gi-appeal. It only includes the final goods and services. So as I said, walay labot tong mga goods in process or mga raw materials nga kuan. So our GDP only measures the final goods and services. It's because it is expected nga ang final goods and services apil na dira tong mga patong mga price sa raw materials, sa labor, overhead. So the final price for the final goods and services already included the prices for the raw materials and the work in process. So fourth, sa number 3 also, so wala pa ilabot ang mga ato mga domestic nga mga kuan. Like for example, kung naamoy mga tanom sa balay, naamoy kamunggay, naamoy kamote, tanglad, so on and so forth, wala na siya naapil sa GDP nato. Okay? But it is should be part of our kuan because it's our production as a nation. Okay? So apil man na sa atong gi-produce. Pero dili na siya, wala na siya na document. Fourth, it excludes the second-hand transactions and non-productive financial transactions. So wala na appeal diri itong mga second-hand, mga kuha na to, barter community. So kana wala na siya na record sa ato ang GDP. So mga kuha na to, mga pre-love nga items nga atong gisell. Okay? So wala po na siya. So non-productive financial transactions, so mga gambling, so kana siya wala siya na-appeal, okay? Especially kato mga illegal gambling, so wala gina siya na measure sa ato ang GDP. Approaches in measuring the GDP, so we have 3 approaches. So the first one, ang ginagamit nato is the expenditure approach. So it's adding all the spending for all the final goods and services during a period of 1 year. So all our expenditures, so all nga gikuan nato, gi-consume, nabayaran nato for consumption, all investment, the government expenditures and net exports or exports minus the imports. So mo na siya ang formula sa ato ang GDP. So CIGN or consumption, investment, government expenditures, and net exports. Second is the income approach. So adding all the incomes earned by households in exchange for the factors of production during a period of time. So kung gain na expenditure atong gi-compute, karon these are all the income. So from our factors of production, so katong land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. So example, compensation of employees, the rents, the profits, the net interest, the indirect taxes. So in our case, the value added tax plus the depreciation. So the depreciation is a non-cash item, so it should be added back. Third is the industrial origin or the gross value added approach. So this is another approach where the economy is divided into 3 section composed of the following industries. So you have first the agriculture, fishery, and forestry. So tanan mga abot nila. Second is the industry or the manufacturing sector. And the third is the service sector. So tanan income coming from all these sectors are added. So that is now our what we call the gross value added. Okay, so the gross value added is also our GDP or the gross domestic product. So in our country, we are using the expenditure approach in computing for the GDP. So what are the shortcomings of our GDP? So one, non-market transactions are not included. So kato kong giingon nga kato inyong mga tanom sa balay, these are not part of the GDP. So second, distribution, kind, and quality of products. So of course, we are only measuring the quality. I mean the money or the figure, but we do not know or we have not inspected if all of those goods have quality. Third is the neglect of leisure time. So leisure time is still part of other goods, pero wala na siya na-appeal sa GDP. The GDP, wala po ilabot ang underground economy. So this refers to our mga informal economy sectors and businesses. So kana mga quick-quickan or uh, everything nga wala na kuan. Like online business nga wala siya na registered, so wala na appeal na siya sa GDP. Kung natay economic goods, we also have economic bads. Okay, so sa GDP, economic goods lang ang included without deducting the economic bads. So example of economic bads is the pollution. Another is the traffic. Okay, so wala na siya na-consider. So nominal versus or the current GDP versus the real GDP. So what is relevant is the real GDP, not the nominal GDP kay posible nga nagdako imong GDP not because you have more production, but because na-increase ang inflation. Okay? Or because of the inflation. So that is why there's a need first to convert the nominal GDP to the real GDP. So to really determine the actual GDP nga increase. So to remove the effect of the inflation, so the formula is nominal GDP times the GDP de factor times 100. So GDP de factor, so i-divide na siya sa katong 1% times the inflation. So talking about the consumption and savings. So consumption means the expenditures made by the household on goods and services. So it's made by the household, spent by these are expenses made by the household on goods and services. So the formula, so you have Y. Y is denoted as income. CB is the borrowings, or also known as the savings, plus the change in the consumption. So our income could either be in the form of savings or consumption. So that's the total income. Now let's talk about the multiplier effect or the multiplier concept. So the multiplier effect is a phenomenon whereby some initial increase or decrease in the rate of spending will bring about more than a proportionate increase or decrease in the national income. Okay, multiplier effect. So for example, we have the expenditure approach, diba? The formula is consumption, investment, government expenditures, and net exports or imports. Now, the government is implementing the Build program. So it is expected that the government expenditures will increase, diba? Pero the fruit of the Build is not only increasing it will not only increase the government expenditures. So probably if there are uh, more access to transport or the infra is already good, there are more road to market, farm to market roads. So the consumption perhaps will increase, the investment will also increase, and perhaps the net exports or the exports will be higher. So if the economy is attractive, so many foreign investors would like to put businesses in the country. So it's one of the program that has a multiplier effect. So that's not only uh, it will not only increase the government expenditures, but there's a possibility it will also cause the increase in other factors, thereby increasing our GDP. So the value of multiplier. So if you want to get the effect or the value of that multiplier, so this is the formula. However, wala na ni siya na-fill sa board exam sa board exam. So, 1 minus 1 minus the MPC. MPC stands for the marginal propensity to consume plus 1 over the marginal propensity to save. Okay. So take note that the MPS or the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume is equal to 1. The factors of consumption. So you have the taste and preference, the population, income, the price level, innovation and promotion, and advertising. So investment. So investment is a capital spending mainly derived not from current income and consumption, but external to the circular flow. So these are the money nga wala gigamit to buy goods and services. So it refers to physical investment. Pwede sad nga you use the money to buy real estate properties, okay? Or you use the money to invest in the financial market. So it refers to physical investment like fixed assets. Investment and the multiplier. So income is equals to the consumption plus investment. Okay. So the savings. So income minus consumption. So your nganong investment na siya ang gibutang dira, it's because uh, of course the savings could be your investment. Okay, so posible nga wala even though nga na maski gani sa bangko, 'di ba, it earns interest. So some of us are putting money in the bank not because we just want to save, but of course to earn at least to earn from our savings. So hence nga nung na investment na siya. Determinants of savings. So what could motivate our consumers, okay, or the household to save? Okay, so we have the three. So price level. So mahal ba or dali ra ba mag maintain? The population growth. So more people, of course, more savings. Third is taxes. So of course, kung higher ang tax sa inyong mga savings and investment, people will not be enticed to invest or to save. So investment demand determinants. So the first determinant is the interest rate. So the level of interest rate is determined by the forces of demand and supply for finance in the money market. Okay. So for example, if you want to increase uh, the demand for money, so ang buhaton sa BSP ana is to lower the interest, okay? To lower the central bank to lower the interest. So kung lower ang interest, so many banks gusto mag-loan or ganahan even the households ganahan mo borrow og money. As to supply of loanable funds, so as to the supply, so the lower interest, it will decrease the supply because if you're the supplier of those loanable funds, tapos ang ma-earn ra nimo nga interest is low or lower, you will be not motivated to supply money. But for those who are borrowing money, lower interest is a good news to them, okay? Because they will only pay lower interest expense. Acceleration principle states that the level of investment is a function of desired changes in output. So multiplier effect between the two, the income and investment. So if the consumers increase their income, so there's a high possibility that it will also increase their investment, okay, or perhaps their savings. So as another determinant of the investment is the innovation. So so kung naanay before maka-invest, so sa una kailangan gyud og kanang tao, okay? So we need to have a licensed nga broker. But nowadays, because of so many online brokers, and then more information in the internet, so a lot of people are now into investing. So third is the profit. So profit for business owners. So the higher the profit, the higher the investment. Expectations. So they are expecting that the economy will recover or rebound. More people will likely to invest. But uh, if the economy will be worse in the coming months or coming years, so investors would not be attracted to invest. National income determinants. So we have the aggregate demand. So the aggregate demand is the total amount of expenditure. So in nominal terms, so on all those domestic goods and services. So manay pasabot sa aggregate demand, all the expenditures on goods and services in the economy. So our aggregate demand, so kung manotice ninyo, it's also the formula for our GDP. So to get the aggregate demand, so you just need to add all the money value for the consumption, investment, the government expenditures plus the um, net exports. So when the aggregate demand is equals to the aggregate supply, so we are experiencing what we call the equilibrium level of the national income. So we are producing what we can supply. Okay, so next is the marginal propensity to consume. So to get the marginal propensity to consume, so simply divide the change in the consumption over the change in income. So to get the marginal propensity to save, so remember nga ang income nato is uh, the sum of the consumption and the savings. So to get the marginal propensity to save, so simply deduct ang 1 sa marginal propensity to consume. And if you want to get the marginal propensity to consume, so you deduct 1 minus the marginal propensity to save. So the growth and equilibrium income is denoted by the Y equals to C, I, and G. So full employment equilibrium is an ideal objective because resources are not wasted. So ang employment is actually a macroeconomic goal. So mo ni ang gusto mo ni atong gina-strive permente that we will fully utilize our land, we will fully utilize our human talents. So all capitals must be fully utilized and our entrepreneurial ability. So as I said gaina, the employment does not only refers to the labor nga factor of production, but all the resources, all the factors of production. And this is our constant challenge. So how do we fully utilize the land? How we fully utilize the labor, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Okay, so the business cycle. So it's the upswings and downswings in the level of real output or economic fluctuations, alternating between periods of depression and boom conditions. So unfortunately, nakalimot ko insert. Okay, but mura rin siya ganang up and down, more siya wave. Okay, so from the trough to the uh, pataas. So starting pa niya, moving up pa siya, then abot sa taas is the boom. Then time will come nga muubos na siya, mo decline. So mag-cause og recession and then depression, balik na pud siya sa starting to boom. So more siya cycle or mga series of waves. So it's not only true sa mga businesses nato, but even our government or even as our economy is experiencing mga upswings and downswings. So we have experienced mga boom, we have experienced recession. So hopefully after the recession and depression, we will go back to our recovery, economic recovery, and eventually a booming situation. So when we talk about unemployment, okay, so pasabot sa unemployment is the unemployed land, unemployed labor, and unemployed capital. So it does not only refer again to the labor sector. Pero most of the time in the news or in the reports, ang pinaka um, usually kung wala na siya, kung unsa na siya nga employment, um, we will we will assume it's about the labor unemployment. So again, the full employment of those resources is our macroeconomic goal. So unemployment rate, so you have the number of unemployed over the labor force. So for investors, so ang pinaka one of the important niya data nga kailangan may bawaan is the unemployment rate. Okay, so if the unemployment rate is very low, so it is bad news for the economy because as we know, ang employees ang ga buhi sa ato economy. So they are the ones working, they are the ones consuming, they are the ones saving and investing. So if there are lower employed people in the economy or mas dagay nawad-an og trabaho, then it's very hard to recover kay we need people to spend money para maka-recover. So if the unemployment rate is low, then it is bad news for the economy. If the no, unemployment rate is unemployed, so kung ubos na siya, it's a good news. But if the unemployment rate is high, it is bad news. We have four types of the unemployment. So the first type of unemployment is called the frictional unemployment. So it is the people between jobs or freshly entering or re-entering the labor market. So pareha sa inyo karon. So you are part of the frictional unemployment. So you freshly graduate pero you're except for those nga na trabaho. So the transition must in the case of our situation COVID-19 mas grabe ang frictional unemployment karon because there is a slow transition sa mga tao. Okay? So transition from being a fresh graduate to entering the labor market. Okay? The second type of unemployment is called the structural unemployment. So it is a mismatch of jobs offered by employees and the potential workers. So it's both the unemployment, so walay trabaho, at the same time underemployed, meaning your qualifications is different from your actual job. So that's what we call the underemployment. Cyclical employment. So this is the unemployment caused by changes in the business cycle. So like for example, we are experiencing recession. So a lot of people have no jobs or dagay mga tao nga na lay off because of this cycle. Seasonal unemployment, so this is unemployment due to season. So of course na yung mga businesses nga seasonal, so diha ra pud sila mo kita. So like for example, during Christmas season, so ah, mas dako ang halin during the Christmas season sa mga naghimo sa mga lanterns, okay, or mga any Christmas decors. But other than that season, so medyo wala pud sila work. So how do we solve the unemployment? So we have uh, two solutions. So the first one is the demand side. So government funded employment of the able-bodied poor. So the government can hire workers, so especially those katong nawad ang trabaho, so they can um, one way of solving this unemployment is to hire those people, okay, by the government. The second solution is called the supply side. So these are policies favorable to employers. So sa man nga mga policies nga favorable sa employers. So example ana is the tax exemption or a reduction of tax. Okay, so that's an example of a supply side solution. So next is the inflation. So it is defined as a broadly based rise in the price level. So increase in the price of the goods and services. Consumer price index is the cost of purchasing a hypothetic market basket of consumption of goods brought by the typical household consumer during a given period of time. So generally a month. So relative to the cost of purchasing the same market basket during the base year. So tanan nga napalit sa household o tanan gi-consume mo na ang i-compute sa consumer price index. So it is compared with the previous year nga consumption. Another index is called the producer price index. So these are the goods consumed by the producers like the energy and the raw materials. So but in the computation of our inflation, so we use the CPI or the consumer price index. So to get the formula to get the inflation rate, so you have the CPI or the consumer price index in the current year less the CPI in the previous year divide by the CPI in the previous year times 100. So theories of inflation. So what causes this inflation? So there are two types of the two possible causes of inflation. The first one is called the demand pull inflation, or also known as the inflationary gap. So resulta ni siya if there is a higher aggregate demand compared to the aggregate supply. So usually we experience this during the holiday season or the Christmas season. So because of the high demand, so mo na siya nga mutaas. Mataas ang mga pamilitonon. The cost push inflation, so these are caused by the rise in prices due to the increase in production cost. So for example, if there's an increase in the gasoline, so of course the prices of the goods will also rise. So again, kung gikan sa production ang cost, then it is a cost push. If gikan sa consumer, it's called the demand pull inflation. Next is the relationship between the inflation and the purchasing power of money. So if the inflation is high, so the general price level increases. Therefore, the money that you can buy with the goods with the same goods will decrease. So mubaba ang purchasing power of money if the inflation is high. And of course, the opposite is true. If the general price level decreases, then the purchasing power of money will increase. So 3 major reasons why the inflation will have a harmful effect. So number 1, unanticipated inflation alters the outcome of long-term projects. So if we have a long-term project, so the cost of those projects will probably increase. So the purchase of machine or investment in the business will increase the risk and retard the level of such productive activities. Second, inflation distorts the information delivered by the prices. So ang information uh, through the prices of the goods, dili na siya mao because of the inflation. Okay, 3, the people will respond to high and variable rates of inflation. So ang pinaka-immediate nga behavior sa tao or sa consumers pag taas ang inflation is to spend less and so that they can have more time to protect themselves from inflation. So that is why kung na-inflation, mas daghay tao nga ma-encourage og save og invest. Core inflation is widely used measure of underlying trend or movement in the average consumer prices. So it strips the volatile price movements. So this core inflation is used as a future indicator of the inflation. But the inflation nga gina-report sa media or gina-release sa BSP is not the core inflation but the headline inflation. So just like last month, so we have a headline inflation of 4.2%. Okay, so fiscal policy. So the fiscal policy is the use of the government spending and taxes to influence the nation's spending, employment, and price level. So basically, it's the manipulation of the national government. Okay, so in terms of the budget, in terms of taxes, employment, and spending. So the purpose of those policies is to attain the price stability, to have relatively full employment and a satisfactory rate of economic growth. So fiscal policy and the crowding out effect. So crowding out effect, so it's squeezing out of the private spending by a deficit-induced increase in the real interest rate. So this happens when there is a large budget deficit. So pag na large budget deficit, so it will cause the interest to go high. So more borrowings will mean more burden to the private spenders. Restrictive fiscal policy is increasing the taxes and reduce government spending. So kung mag-increase og tax and reduce ta og government spending, we're actually having a crowding in effect. Okay? So meaning you are discouraging the people to buy or to consume. So this happens, ang restrictive fiscal policy will happen if the government is trying to solve an inflation problem or hyperinflation. Okay? So that is to prevent the economy to overheat. Pero kung gusto po nila nga i-encourage ang mga tao to buy more or to have more money in circulation, so they have to do the opposite. Okay? So decrease taxes and increase the government spending. So fiscal policy as a stabilization tool. So a modern synthesis. So these are the results of the studies kung effective ba daw ang fiscal policy as stabilization tool. So what they have found out, so number 1, there is a need for a proper timing of a discretionary fiscal policy. So so dapat naka-timing yun siya kay kung dili siya timing tapos nag-recover ang economy, so it will not give us good result. So timing is both difficult to achieve and crucial. Second, automatic stabilizers reduce the fluctuation of aggregate demand and help to direct the economy towards the full employment. So naka-reduce sa fluctuation, and it helps the government to direct the economy toward full employment. Number three, fiscal policy is much less potent than what early Keynesian view implied. So there are studies nga ang fiscal policies daw kuno sa government is less effective or less potent in the the change in the behavior of the consumers. So if the policies are implemented by the government, so that it's called fiscal policy. But if the policy is implemented by our central bank or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, it is called monetary policy. So monetary policy is a macroeconomic policy which involves the regulation of the money supply, the credit, interest rates, in order to control the level of spending in the economy. So it is a tool used to achieve macroeconomic goals, which is the price stability and economic growth. So depende sa situation. So for example, the BSP wants to solve a recession or wants to alleviate the unemployment. So ang policy nga dapat i-employ nila is the expansionary monetary policy. So how to solve the recession and unemployment? So we have to increase the inflation by lowering the interest rates. Okay, so and reduction in the reserve requirements. So BSP manggod is ang lender of last resort for banks. So sila kung kulang ang money sa mga bangko, so magbaro sila og money kay BSP. So ang bangko, of course dito sila kay BSP mo mag-loan or magbaro, it's because si BSP ang pinakagamay og interest rate. Okay? So kung gamay ang interest rate, ang ipatong pod sa mga bangko when they lend their money sa mga businesses or households is also lower. So because kay lower ang interest, so they will be enticed to borrow more money kay gamay raman ang interest expense. The banks also have reserve requirements. So sa kada deposit nato naagi na siya amount nga dili pwede gamiton sa BSP para ipaborrow sa lain. Let's say out of your 1,000 pesos, so the reserve requirement is 20%. So kay 20% ang reserve requirement, the BSP can only lend money nga 800 to other people. So 80% lang. So sa effect kung i-reduce ang reserve requirements, so more money to circulate or more money to lend. Okay? So let's say from 20%, nahimo na lang 10% ang reserve. So meaning sa imong 1,000, 100 peso na lang ang reserve. The rest 900 peso will be used to lend money. So again, for expansionary monetary policy, the BSP used this type of monetary policy to solve the recession and unemployment. So other measures, so the Bangko Sentral will buy securities through open market operations. So they can buy uh, financial securities. So what are the specific actions nga buhaton nila? So the BSP will lower the bank rate. So before the pandemic, so we have 2.5% nga bank rate. Karon murag na sa 1.25%. So the BSP is actually employing the expansionary monetary policy because we are in recession. So so if the BSP will lower the bank rate, so the money supply increases, interest rate falls. So if the money supply increases, the interest rate falls. So if the interest rate falls, investment will increase or expansion activities of the businesses will increase. If that happens, the aggregate demand increases and then the aggregate output increases. So therefore, the price level will rise. So now kailangan na siya i-mention kani nga mga factors, kani nga mga effect kay dili siya automatic nga pag mag-lower ang bank rate, moubos na dayon ang price level. It is a domino effect. Okay? So kailangan mahitabo sa ni. So kung mag-lower ang bank rate, kailangan mahitabo sa nga mag-increase ang money supply, mag-interest rate fall, investment increase, aggregate demand increase before the price level will rise. So kung naay mga question like the BSP lowers the bank rate, the decrease in the bank rate will cause the price to level to rise. So dili na siya fully true. Kaya nga naman, there are things that needs to happen first. So domino effect before the price level rises. So kung gaina is expansionary, so we are encouraging people to spend or to invest or to circulate more money in the economy. The other problem, so let's say inflation, so the monetary policy nga will solve this problem is the contractionary or the restrictive monetary policy. So opposite sa tanan gibuhat ni BSP gaina. So kung gaina nagpalit siya og securities, karon he will sell the securities through open market operations. So that means kung mag-sell og securities ang BSP, daghay money nga nakapundo sa iya. Wala kay kung gaina nagbayad makag security, so there are a lot of money circulating in the economy. But once the BSP sells securities, so gibaligda niya yung securities, ang money nga makuha ni BSP will be deposited. So wala siya nag-circulate sa economy. Other measures, so they could increase the bank rate. So kung mag-increase sila bank rate, dapat ang money supply will decrease. Ganong gamay man ang supply because the banks are not attracted to borrow money kay BSP kay taas ang bank rate. So there will be fewer money nga gamiton for expansion or to lend sa ato mga businesses. So if the money supply decreases, the interest rate rises. If the interest rate will rise, investment will decrease. The aggregate demand decrease. Therefore, the aggregate output decreases by the investment decreases. Then ultimately, the price level will fall. So again, kani nga mga factors kailangan pa may tabo. It is not automatic nga kung mag-raise si bank rate, si bank og rate, automatic ang price level will fall. So there are things that needs to happen first before the price level will decrease. So money supply. So anything that is generally accepted as payment for goods or services or in the repayment of debts. So accepted as payment. So it could be your savings, it could be your money transfer, could be a check. Okay, so that does not really refer to the currency or the coins and the bills. So functions of money. So the money is used as the medium of exchange. So the money is also a unit of account. So that's how we measure the goods and services. Money is also as a store of value. So these are the functions of our money. Now, we have to be familiar with the different types of money. So we have money 1 or M1. So it's called the narrow money. So ang M1 is only composed of the currency in circulation and the peso demand deposits. So currency in circulation, coins and bills, plus the checking accounts or the peso demand deposits. That's called the narrow money. M2 is called the broad money. So ang composition sa M2 is the M1. So i-add na to ang peso savings and time deposits. So muna ang composition sa M2 or the broad money. M3 or the broad money liabilities. So M2 plus mga deposit substitutes such as the promissory notes and commercial papers. So kani mga commercial papers are actually bonds, but their maturity is less than 1 year. So we have M4. So the M3 plus transferable and other deposits in foreign currency. So our deposits in foreign currency are also part of the M4. So in the economy, we also need to try to achieve the market equilibrium. So our money supply should be we should strive nga dapat mag-equal ang atong money supply sa atong money demand. Okay, so next, inflation targeting. So muna ang strategy nga gina-employ ni BSP when they try to attain the price stability. So inflation targeting is announcing the target inflation. So and promises to achieve the said inflation over a specific time period. So for example, they are targeting 2 to 4% inflation. So dapat pangatawanan yun na ni BSP. So what are the requisites for the successful adoption of inflation targeting? So one, there should be a firm commitment to the price stability. Second, our central bank must be independent. Third, they should have a good forecasting ability. Fourth is transparency. Five is accountability. And lastly is the sound financial system. Okay. So we're done with our first review class or lecture. Basig na mo'y questions, clarifications.
Sir, may question, sir.
Yes.
Gi-chat ni Roland sa ako, sir. May question.
Dira man gichat.
Maulo siya, sir. One, sir, regarding sa itong unemployment rate,
Oo.
sa pag-compute ng unemployment rate, gina-consider ba itong 4 types of unemployment? Di ba na 4 types? Itong frictional, structural, cyclical. So pag mo release like unemployment rate, sir, specific ba na to what type of unemployment or general ra siya, sir? Eh kung general,
Oo.
misleading na siya if general.
Tama.
Okay, mo to first question.
Okay, actually, kanang gina-release sa news, kanang mga reports nga ginapakita nila is more general. Okay? But actually, the NEDA has really more detailed nga computation for the unemployment rate. So dito nimo makita ang computation or what is the percentage nga caused by the frictional unemployment, the structural, the cyclical and seasonal unemployment. Pero most pinakadako og percentage ana sa kanang unemployment rate nato is not due to the frictional katong tulo, katong cyclical o seasonal. Most likely ang pinakadako og cause ana is katong structural unemployment. Okay? Structural unemployment. Mo na pinakadako og percentage sa ato ang unemployment rate. Pero as to kung ginapakita pa, wala na nila ginapakita. Okay? So the general ang ilang ginahatag sa public.
Sige, next question, Carlo.
Kuan, sir.
Mm.
Under inflation o deflation, sir, ay mas better sa economy. Sa point of view.
Actually, ang duha have goods and na siya advantage na po siya disadvantage. But although we cannot di na to na malikayan ang duha, but generally kanang duha is bad for us. Okay? Generally bad for us. But um in the point of view of consumers, of course, okay? Di po na siya maayo, but dip naman good yapoy advantages o disadvantages. Depende kung unsa ka nga type sa sector. Okay? Like for example, if you are sa inflation nga case, okay? So kung inflation nga case, if you are the consumer group, of course that is a bad news. Okay? Bad news na sa imo. Pero dili na siya bad news for our businesses. Okay? Dili na siya bad news for the investors because magkataas ang inflation, mas magkataas ang mga stock prices. Okay? So it depends sa unsa nga sector atong ginatan-aw. Because inflation and deflation, kung makita na to, it's generally bad kay most of us are consumers. Pero there are particular sectors nga naka-benefit sa inflation. Napoy uban sectors nga naka-benefit sa deflation pero naka-damage pud sa ila ang deflation. Okay? For example, deflation is good for the consumers, pero they are not good for our businessmen or for our producers. So we cannot really say nga good or bad siya because na siya duha ka effect. Okay? Same with our currency. Kung magkataas ang peso, napod na siya benefit. Pero if you have relatives nga OFW sending money here, so it is a bad news for them. Okay.
Kani sir, last question sir kang from Karen Gulfo ni sir. Kuan. Asa na to ginakong ay unsa na to pag-determine sir nga na inflation? Asa siya gina-compare? Kanang na basis, may base rate kung asa gina-compare parang paingon ta nga na inflation.
So every month actually na ang NEDA na magyud na sila na sila information about ana. So it's not only 1 year ang gina-compare but even month nag-compare na sila. Okay? But mostly kanang inflation nga gina-present nila is mo na siya ang mga change in price last year or the base year. So let's say 2021 naman ta karon. So ang gina-base ko nag-release sila og 2021 inflation. Ang ilang gi-compare ana is ang 2020 nga goods and services nato. So if you're asking unsa nila pagkuha ang data, remember everything is naa sa BIR. Okay? So diya sila makakita sa data nga about consumption, sa ato ang sa prices, sa VAT. So diya nila matrace. Okay? So if there is an increase in the prices of the same goods and services after a year, so muna ang difference niya is what we call inflation. So kung nagtaas inflation, pag nag-ubos that's deflation. Okay. Dili lang na siya 1 year but even 1 month gina-compare po na siya. Let's say kung February, gina-compare niya ang prices sa goods last month. So ang inflation nga gina-release sa February is compared with the prices of the goods and services last month. Okay, so any clarification or further questions?
Sir. Accounting profit o economic profit, sir. Kasi difference na, sir.
Accounting profit sa duha?
Yes, sir.
Of course, the accounting profit is based on the general accounting standards. Okay? But there are profits nga not in money terms. Okay? So, for example, the opportunity cost, wala na siya sa ato ang accounting profit. Pero apilo na siya nimo sa economic profit. So, I think that's the big difference between the economic profit and the accounting kay nay mga data nga nasa accounting profit nga wala na apil sa no, nay mga gina-consider nato sa economics nga cost nga wala equivalent into money terms kay wala magyud nahitabo nga transaction. Example ana ang mga opportunity cost. Okay? Because they're not historical, di ba? It's the giforga na nimo nga cost.
Kuan, sir. Last.
Mm.
Unsay
Sige.
difference sa kuan sa deflation o recession?
Deflation is describes the behavior of the prices of goods and services. Okay? So there mo na siya. Ang deflation ug inflation, they only talk about the prices of the goods and services, kung nitaas ba, niubos ba. But when you talk about recession, mga depression, it refers to the kanang the worsening condition of our economy. Okay? So for example, in the recession, so kung atong GDP mo ubos, okay, that could indicate nga we are undergoing a recessionary phase. So especially kung tulo na ta ka quarter nga nag-ubos, okay, so it's an indication nga recession na. So so in short, kung ang inflation or deflation will only talk about the prices but will not really talk about our national profit or our national income. Okay? So when we determine kung recession ba na or depression, naa na siya certain criteria para ma-meet, para makaingon ta nga, oy, we are already in the recession phase or we are in the depression phase. For example, sa recession, kung tulo na ka quarter sa tuig nga nagsige kag ubos, sige ka ubos ang GDP, it means that we are now in the recession phase. Now, the problem is what if mo prolong pa na siya, more than a year na, then we are now experiencing what we call the depression. So, anong importante na siya? It's because that means kung naatay recession, our economy is not producing goods, a lower production of goods and services. Gamay ra tag na produce. Okay? Or we are mas dako ang underutilization sa ato ang mga labor, sa ato ang land, capital, and entrepreneurial ability. Wa kayo siya na fully utilized compared last year. Okay? Compared last year.
So if
So
na
mo na siya nga,
recession, sir,
na siya. Mm.
if na recession, more likely nga inflation ang mahitabo kaysa sa deflation.
Now, supposedly kung ang impact lang sa recession atong tanawon, okay? Because there are a lot of factors nga nung naay inflation or deflation. So the recession is not only the cause of the whatever inflation or deflation, but mostly ang gina-forecast man gud pag naay recession, okay? So syempre ubos ang demand sa mga tao, 'di ba? People would like to save more money to invest their money, dili kay sila ganahan magpalit. So in short, mobaba ang demand. Okay? Pag mobaba ang demand, most likely the recession should create a what we call the surplus situation. Okay? Surplus situation. So meaning dagan kag na-produce pero gamay ra mo palit. Inana siya. So ang may tabo kung dagan imong napalit, dagay na imong na-produce, gamay ra mo palit, it should cause deflation. Mag-cause dapat siya og deflation. Okay? But what is happening right now sa ato ang inflation man good is nga nahitabo sa ato, it's not due to the recession. It is due to the African swine flu. Okay? Nag-cause og shortage sa mga pigs ug sa mga agricultural products food. Not only the African swine flu, but less naman ang farmers nga maka-produce og mahal ang ilang mga raw materials nga ginagamit. So mo nang naatay inflation. Okay? So it's not really koan. So recession is only one factor nga nung mag-deflate ta, but it's not the only factor nga nung mag-deflate. Okay, kung mas bugat pa ang katong African swine flu o katong mga koan. So wala siya nag-cause og surplus, nag-cause na inoon siya og shortage. Okay? mo nang natay inflation. Okay, I hope na sabtan.
Okay na, sir. Nguban, si Zap, sir.
Okay, so sige, pangutan na lang.
Answer. Ano sa relation sa inflation ug unemployment, sir?
Sa relation sa inflation o
Inflation and-
unemployment.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, sa isahon na to, inflation is the increase in the price of goods and services. Okay? Due to shortage, so due to the consumers, okay? Or perhaps due to the producers. 'Di ba? So, kung mataas ang consumption sa mga individual, kung daghan sila income, naa sila trabaho, posible nga mag-cause og inflation. 'Di ba? Because of what we call the demand pull inflation. But the demand pull inflation is not the only cause for the inflation. Pwede sad nga ang cost sa materials sa mga producers ni increase mo nang naatay inflation. Okay, nakuha ninyo? So, kung in relation to the unemployment, ang ato rang pwedeng makuan ana is ang magamit nga explanation nga nung connected silang duha, it's because of the demand pull inflation type nga cause. Okay? So kung ang unemployment is very high, that means there are lower employers, lower number of employees nga nagtrabaho sa economy. 'Di ba? Daghay na tangtang, daghay na layoff, daghay na wad ang trabaho. That means mubaba ang consumption. Kung mubaba ang consumption, mubaba ang demand. Okay? Mubaba ang demand. So, the unemployment, kung taas ang unemployment, dapat muubos ang inflation. Kung taas ang unemployment, ubos dapat ang demand pull inflation. Okay? Pero kung taas ang kung ubos ang imong unemployment rate, meaning gamay ray walay trabaho, daghay nagtrabaho. So remember nga ang nag-run sa economy nato are mostly the employees. Kaya sila man ang naikwarta. Sila ang maka-afford to buy a lot of goods. Okay? To purchase the services sa economy. So, kung dagay mga consumers, especially for example sa Christmas, dagay bonuses. So kung makita ninyo, mutaas ang inflation. Okay? Because of what we call the demand pull inflation. So, mana siya ang kuha niya. That's the connection between them. Okay, na sabtan. Na klaro ba?
Verify lang ako, sir. So, pag demand pull inflation, sir, ang cause, mo gamay ang employment, mataas ang employment,
No.
sir. Kay demand
Dili.
pull, mas dagan ang
Dili.
mag-work.
Dili necessary nga ang demand pull ang mag-cause og unemployment. Okay?
Yes, sir.
It's actually the other way around. Okay? So ang atong independent variable ani is ang unemployment. Okay? The dependent variable is the cause, is the result. Okay? So kung natay taas ang unemployment rate, wala ko kiingon niya, kung taas ang unemployment rate, lesser ang consumers nga or lesser ang number of employees, lesser ang consumption. So kung lesser ang demand, lesser ang consumption, lower ang demand, the inflation will decrease or malower ang gani. Wala inflation may tabo but
Sir
deflation
Lobat
actually.
na ka sir, basig mawala kag kalit. Ayaw may BIA.
Sige lang.
Mawalag kalit, Jud.
Question ni mo, Zap.
Okay. So ang atong independent variable ani is ang unemployment. Okay? The inflation is just the effect of our consumption, our buying and selling behavior. So mo na kong giingon nga if dili inflation actually ang makos but deflation kung taas ang unemployment rate. So kung dagay walay trabaho, dili kayo mo taas ang prices sa goods. So So again, I will use the phrase ceteris paribus kung kana lang duha atong ginatanaw nga factor. Okay? Because there are a lot of factors nga nung naay inflation, nga nung naay deflation. So kana lang how we connect the two, posible inana ang may tabo. Kung gamay ang employees, gamay ang demand, gamay ang consumption, therefore it will cause surplus, aggregate surplus. And according to Adam Smith, the market will correct. So may tabo, they have to lower the price level. Okay? So dili siya inflation but actually deflation na may tabo pag inana. But the opposite is true pag baliktad, pag gamay ra kayo ang unemployment rate. So kung gamay ra ang unemployment rate, pasabot ana, mas dagan ang nakatrabaho o nanagan ang mga naay trabaho. So kung dagay na narbaho, dagay kwarta, so they can afford more goods and services. So it will increase the consumption, it will increase the demand, it will cause shortage. And the shortage will cause increase in the price level of the goods and services. So muna ay makakos og inflation. But particularly, the demand pull inflation lang atong isgutan. Okay? Okay? So daghan siya agian nga events before we can actually make a conclusion. Okay? Okay, so other questions? Okay, thank you.
Like, Carlo, like.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
So, so it's very important nga nagit tayo good background sa economics o accounting because actually we kumubasa mo MAS o finance, it is anchored on in the mostly sa economics nga mga concepts. Okay, sige, napay question?
Wala na siguro, sir.
Wala na ba? Okay, so I hope you have learned something today or you are refreshed.
Yes.
Okay, so
Char.
so ako ma-recommend sa inyo nga if nalang mo'y time, okay? So most of the questions actually sa board is taken from the managerial economics nga subject. Okay? So kanang kasagaran mong gawa sa inyo, that's actually managerial economics. Okay, so you can kuan na yung mga libro sa website na yung mga libre nga ebook. So just in case na pa mo'y time to study economics, nahumanan ninyo ang inyong reviewers. So just to give you para masabtan ninyo ang overall picture. So at least maka-study mo sa managerial economics, especially sa demand and supply nga subtopics. Right?
Happy birthday din.
Okay, so what would be our next topic, next meeting?
Sa'yo mo din.
So man mag-finman na ta?
Okay na, sir.
Okay man po na, sir.
Hinman
So
ta.
may unahon na to sa mag-start ta sa chapter 1 gyud or okay na mo ana?
Tumoy-tumoy, sir.
Tumoy-tumoy ta mag-start. Okay.
Mga black
Wala ka,
shows.
dili kayo ano sa cover. Yung mga bitan.
Sige. We will start with siguro ko ano lang. Capital structure and leverage.
Masagali na.
Ano siya? So optimal kato mga optimal capital structure. So pilay percentage sa debt, sa equity.
Sige, sir.
Mada nadira tong
Sure na,
hamada
basig na
equation.
i-quiz, sir. Para motivate me.
Okay. So gusto mo mag-quiz?
Who's up?
Okay, so sige, magatag ko quiz.
Kititig kasi sa akin.
Okay, pero of course, for the review to be effective, dapat maunahon ninyo og answer ang quiz before mo kuan.
Shems.
Okay. Kung mag-una ko discuss, aya mo mag-quiz, so maratag nag-dili review. So,
Laban.
okay, so sige lang. Exempted mo sa economics, so maghatag na ko quiz later. Pero for the next topic, so ako nang ihatagdaan ang kuan inyong answeran para makaibalo mo unsa inyong kuan yung weakness. Okay, so that's it. So thank you for attending our review. So maski short notice.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sir Dan.
Happy
Thank
birthday,
you.
then.
Picture,
Birthday.
so
Happy birthday.
Picture.
Happy birthday.
Picture pa di ay
O picturing ko an jam.
lang
Wala ko kabalo. Wala ko.
sa
Nag-phone ra ko.
Duro ka kung klaro sa kuha.
Sister?
Denmark na ana siya.
Laptop.
Kaya ako sa itry stop.
Pag-retouch, Carlo.
Record pa man.
Pag-counting mo ko ng sister. Ayan.
Ismail na mo daan.